What if I told you that the most foundational sentence in Western civilization, the very opening line of the Bible, has been mistranslated, misunderstood, and misinterpreted for nearly 2,000 years? What if the story you were told about a singular, solitary creator, speaking the universe into existence from an empty void, is not the full story? In fact, what if it is not even what the original text says at all? Prepare yourself, because the truth is hidden in plain sight in the very first verse. Genesis 1:1. In English, it reads, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." It feels absolute, singular, definitive, but in its original Hebrew, it says something far more mysterious, far more controversial. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim vayet haaretz. The key is that one word, Elohim. We translate it as God. But that is a theological decision, not a literal translation. In the Hebrew language, the suffix im denotes a plural. Cherub is one celestial being, cherubim are many. Seraph is one, seraphim are many, and Eloah is the singular for a god. But the Bible, right from the very beginning, doesn't use the singular form. It uses Elohim, gods, plural. A literal, grammatically raw translation of the Bible's first sentence would be, "In the beginning, gods created the heavens and the earth." Let that sink in. The foundation of monotheism, the bedrock of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, begins with a plural noun for the divine. Now, for centuries, theologians and scholars have scrambled to explain this away. They've offered two primary explanations, two narratives designed to patch over this glaring grammatical anomaly. The first is what is called the plural of majesty, or the royal we. The idea is that God is speaking like a king, using a plural form to signify his immense power and sovereignty. There is a fatal flaw in this argument. It is anachronistic. Ancient Near Eastern kings, the contemporaries of the early Israelites, did not speak this way. The pharaohs of Egypt, the kings of Babylon and Assyria, they spoke in the first-person singular. I, Nebuchadnezzar. I, Sennacherib. The royal we was a much later development, primarily in European monarchies. To project it back thousands of years onto the pages of Genesis is a historical error. It simply doesn't fit the time or the place. The second explanation, which became particularly popular in Christian theology, is that Elohim is an early, veiled reference to the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It is a clever theological retrofitting, an attempt to find the New Testament in the Old. But again, it falls apart under scrutiny. The authors of Genesis, writing thousands of years before the time of Jesus, would have had absolutely no concept of the Christian Trinity. That doctrine was debated and formalized centuries after Christ, at councils like Nicaea and Chalcedon. To suggest that the ancient Hebrew scribes were embedding a highly complex, future Christian doctrine into their creation account is to ignore their own historical and theological context. They were not thinking of a Trinity. They were thinking of something else, something their culture understood, something that has since been intentionally buried under layers of interpretation. So we are left with the stark, unsettling reality of the text itself, Elohim plural. This isn't a mistake. It is not a typo. It is a deliberate choice. And it begs the most profound question we could possibly ask of the Scriptures. If the word for God is plural, then who were Gate Dat? Who was in that creative council at the dawn of time? This is Genesis's greatest secret. And for those with the courage to look, the Bible itself provides the answer. The story you think you know is just the beginning. Imagine not a void, but a chamber, not a solitary voice, but a chorus. The evidence for this radical rereading of our creation story doesn't stop with a single word. It echoes throughout the first chapters of Genesis, like a drumbeat growing louder and more insistent. We must move to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. This is the moment humanity is conceived. Pay close attention to the language. It is perhaps the most revealing and unsettling sentence in the entire book. The text says, "And Elohim said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Let that wash over you. Let Shutu make man, in Shutu image, after Jotu likeness. The pronouns are plural. This is not the voice of a single being. This is a deliberation. It is a statement of collective intent. Who is us? Who constitutes our? If we hold to the traditional view of a singular God, this verse becomes nonsensical. Is God talking to himself? The royal we argument falters here even more than before, because it's followed by action. The creation of humanity is a collaborative project. Some have suggested he is speaking to the angels, but this creates an even greater theological problem. Are humans made in the image of angels? Is humanity a reflection of the angelic rather than the divine? And more importantly, the next verse, verse 27, says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. He created them." The text reverts to the singular his, but it is describing the fulfillment of the plural decree made in the previous verse. It's like a chairman of a board saying, "Let us pass this resolution," and then the company secretary recording. The chairman executed the decision. The decision was collective, even if the action is attributed to the head of the council. The implications are staggering. The creation of humankind was not a solitary act. It was a group decision. Picture it, a divine council, a heavenly assembly of beings, the Elohim, convened. And in that assembly, a proposal was made. Let us make a new being, something in our own likeness, a reflection of us. This single verse shatters the pristine image of a lone creator and replaces it with something far more dynamic, far more complex, and far more aligned with the cultures of the ancient world. The Israelites did not live in a vacuum. They were surrounded by civilizations, the Canaanites, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, all of whom believed in a pantheon of gods ruled by a high god. The language in Genesis 1:26 sounds strikingly similar to the deliberations of these divine assemblies found in Mesopotamian epics, like the Enuma Elish. It appears the early Israelites shared this worldview, but with a crucial difference for them. One member of that council, Yahweh, was their supreme sovereign. But the clues don't stop there. The pattern continues. Let's journey out of the Garden of Eden, past the fall of man, to Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They have disobeyed. And what is the divine reaction? Again, listen to the pronouns. And the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of Jutat, to know good and evil." Like one of Jutat. Once more, the plural. Who is this? Us. The serpent had promised Eve, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." It seems the serpent was, in a terrifying way, telling the truth. Humanity, by partaking in this knowledge, had ascended to a state comparable to the members of this divine group. They had become like one of them. Again, if we argue this, us refers to God and the angels, the statement loses its power. Can a mere angel be equated with the supreme Elohim in its knowledge of good and evil? The text implies a comparison between beings of a similar kind. Man had touched a level of consciousness, of moral awareness, that was characteristic of this divine community. The fear was that man, now possessing this God-like knowledge, would reach for the tree of life and gain immortality as well, becoming a permanent rival, a terrestrial god. The response was to exile him from the garden. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a strategic containment by a council that saw a potential threat. Let's leap forward in the narrative to Genesis chapter 11, the story of the Tower of Babel. Humanity, united by a single language, begins to build a tower to reach the heavens, to make a name for themselves. It is an act of supreme hubris. And how does the divine realm respond? Genesis 11, verse 7, "Come, let Tutatat go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. Let Tutatat go down." Again, the same council language, a plural deliberation, followed by a plural action. It is a divine intervention decided upon and executed by a group, over and over, at the pivotal moments of creation, the fall, and the scattering of nations. The text of Genesis defaults to this language of a divine plurality. We have been trained to read past it, to smooth it over with theological explanations that came centuries later. But the text itself, in its raw and primal form, is screaming a different story. It is painting a picture not of a singular God, but of a heavenly assembly, a council of Elohim, making decisions that shape the destiny of humanity. This isn't a grammatical quirk. It is a worldview. It is a lost cosmology, a forgotten understanding of the divine that has been hiding in our most sacred books since the beginning. The question is no longer if the text describes a plurality of divine beings. The question now is, what other evidence exists? If Genesis hints at this divine council, do other parts of the Bible speak of it more explicitly? The answer is a resounding yes, and what they reveal is more shocking and more detailed than you can possibly imagine. The rabbit hole goes much, much deeper. We have seen the subtle but persistent clues in Genesis, a plural noun for God, a divine council deliberating the creation and fate of humanity. These are the spectral footprints of a forgotten theology. But now, we leave the shadows of Genesis and step into the blazing light of the Psalms. For it is here, in the poetic heart of the Bible, that the divine counsel is no longer a subtle implication, but the explicit subject. The smoking gun is found in Psalm 82. This psalm is short, only 8 verses, but its theological dynamite is enough to level the foundations of traditional monotheism. It begins with a sentence so clear, so unambiguous, that it is astonishing it is not more widely known. Verse 1. Elohim stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the Elohim. Let's break that down with the precision it deserves. Elohim nitzav ba'adat El. God stands in the assembly of El. Bikerev Elohim yishpot. In the midst of the gods he judges. The text uses the word Elohim twice in one sentence, and they clearly mean 2 different things. The first Elohim is the subject, the one standing, the one judging. This is the supreme being, Yahweh. But what is he standing in? The congregation of the mighty, the assembly of El. And who is he judging? The second Elohim, the gods, plural. One supreme Elohim is calling a meeting of a council of other, subordinate Elohim to pass judgment upon them. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry in the sense of being fanciful. This is a depiction of a celestial courtroom. The rest of the psalm is the verdict rendered by the high God against these lesser gods. He accuses them, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked?" He reminds them of their duty: give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. He is castigating them for mismanaging their appointed duties. These other Elohim, these members of the divine council, had apparently been given jurisdiction over the nations of the earth, and they were failing. They were corrupt. They were unjust. And the supreme Elohim is holding them to account. The most shocking part comes in verses 6 and 7. God says to these other gods, "I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High. All of you, nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince." Think about the sheer audacity of this statement. The supreme God acknowledges their status. You are gods, Elohim, sons of the Most High. He confirms their divine nature, yet because of their corruption, he sentences them to mortality. He condemns them to die like mortal men. This psalm gives us the entire structure of the heavenly hierarchy. There is a Most High El Elyon, who is the supreme judge. There is a council of sons of the Most High, other Elohim, who have been given authority. And these lesser Elohim are being judged and even sentenced to death for their cosmic malpractice. This isn't just a one-off mention. The idea of this heavenly court, this assembly of divine beings, appears elsewhere. Turn to the Book of Job, chapter 1. The scene is set not on earth, but in the heavens. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Hebrew for sons of God is B'nai Elohim, the sons of the gods. This is the official title for the members of the divine council. They are celestial beings, heavenly governors, who report for duty. And who is among them? Satan, which in Hebrew means the accuser or the adversary. He is not yet the ultimate personification of evil as in later theology. Here, he is a functionary, a celestial prosecuting attorney, whose job is to test the righteousness of humanity. The scene in Job provides a narrative illustration of the very council Psalm 82 describes, a gathering of the Beni Elohim before the Lord Yahweh. Now for the piece de resistance. The evidence that ties all of this together and reveals the original biblical worldview in its most explicit form. For this, we must go to the Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32. But we cannot use most modern Bibles. For centuries, a crucial verse was altered, its meaning obscured. But thanks to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, we now have access to a much older, more original version of the text. Let's compare. In most modern Bibles, based on the medieval Masoretic text, Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9 read, "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the Tatsons of Israel taught." This version suggests that the nations were divided up based on the 70 descendants of Jacob who went to Egypt. It's a very Israel-centric view. But it's not what the text originally said. The version found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is hundreds of years older and which is supported by the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, says something profoundly different. It reads, "When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the dancens of God chant." Or, in some manuscripts, according to the number of the angels of God. This is a bombshell. This is the entire cosmic map laid bare. The original text states that the Supreme God, the Most High El Elyon, divided humanity into 70 nations, and over each nation he appointed a divine guardian, one of the sons of God, one of the Beni Elohim from his council. This is why Psalm 82 shows God judging these other Elohim. They are the divine patrons of the nations who were failing in their duties. But what about Israel? The very next verse, verse 9, completes the picture. "But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance." Here is the original theology of the ancient Israelites, stark and clear. There is a pantheon of divine beings, the sons of God. The Most High God assigned these beings to rule over the various nations of the earth. But he chose one nation, Israel, for his own direct inheritance, to be the portion of Yahweh. The early religion of Israel was not strict monotheism, the belief that only one God exists. It was a form of monolatry, the belief that many gods exist, but a commitment to worship only one, their patron, Yahweh. The entire narrative of the Old Testament is not about Israel fighting against imaginary idols of wood and stone. It is the story of Yahweh waging war against other, real, spiritual entities, the corrupt Elohim of the other nations, Baal, Chemosh, Molech, Ashtoreth. These were not just statues. In the Israelite worldview, they were the rival spiritual powers, the corrupt council members, that Yahweh had to defeat to prove his supremacy. This is a radical paradigm shift. It recontextualizes everything. The Bible is not denying the existence of other gods. In its earliest layers, it is affirming their existence and placing them in a celestial hierarchy under the ultimate authority of Yahweh. We have seen the evidence in Genesis, the courtroom drama in the Psalms, the administrative meeting in Job, and the cosmic map in Deuteronomy. The Bible itself testifies to a plural divine world. And if the canonical texts are this explicit, what might we find if we dared to look into the books that were deemed too controversial, too dangerous to be included? What happens when we open the forbidden Book of Enoch? We have journeyed through the canonical scriptures, uncovering the explosive secret of the Elohim and the divine council. We've seen how the Bible itself, in its oldest layers, describes a world populated by multiple divine beings under the command of a supreme God, Yahweh. This worldview, where other gods exist, but only one is to be worshipped, explains so much of the Old Testament narrative. But the story was even more detailed, more elaborate in the minds of the ancient Jews than the canonical texts let on. To get the full picture, we must now venture into the shadows, into the realm of the Apocrypha, to a book that was once considered scripture by many early Jews and Christians, but was later suppressed and cast out. We must open the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is one of the most important non-canonical works of Jewish literature ever written. It was profoundly influential in the centuries before and during the time of Jesus. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, proving its antiquity and importance. It is even quoted directly in the New Testament, in the Epistle of Jude. Early church fathers like Tertullian and Origen regarded it highly. This was not some obscure, fringe text. It was a central part of the theological conversation. And its primary subject matter is a dramatic expansion of the very ideas we have been exploring, the nature of the sons of God and their interaction with humanity. The book begins by taking a cryptic and brief story from Genesis and blowing it up into a full-scale cosmic epic. The story is in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. It reads, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." In the canonical Bible, this is a bizarre and unexplained fragment. Who are these sons of God? Who are the Nephilim? The text moves on quickly, leaving us with tantalizing questions, but the Book of Enoch provides the detailed backstory that every ancient Jew would have known. Enoch tells us that these sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, the same members of the divine council, were a specific group of 200 divine beings called the Watchers. They were stationed on Mount Hermon, tasked with watching over humanity. But these Watchers, led by a figure named Shemiaza, abandoned their heavenly post. They lusted after human women. They made a pact, swore an oath, and descended to earth in a great act of cosmic rebellion. This was not a small transgression. It was a fundamental violation of the cosmic order. They took human wives, and the offspring of these unions were the Nephilim, a race of giants, hybrid beings who filled the earth with violence, chaos, and destruction. The world became so corrupt, so contaminated by this unholy mixture of the divine and the human, that it prompted the Great Flood as a way to cleanse the earth of their monstrous progeny. But the Watchers did more than just procreate with humans. According to Enoch, they taught humanity forbidden knowledge, celestial secrets they were never meant to have. One taught the art of making swords and weapons, filling the world with war. Another taught the use of cosmetics and adornments, leading to vanity and promiscuity. Others taught sorcery, astrology, and the reading of signs. In essence, the Watchers initiated a premature and corrupting technological and cultural revolution. They gave humanity tools and knowledge that it was not spiritually ready for, leading to its downfall. This story provides a powerful alternate explanation for the origin of evil. It wasn't just a serpent and an apple. It was a full-scale rebellion and contamination by a faction of rogue divine beings. How does this connect to our investigation of Elohim? The Book of Enoch provides a vivid, narrative case study of the divine council in action. It shows that the sons of God were not just passive members of an assembly, but active agents with free will. It demonstrates that the council was not monolithic. There were loyal factions and rebellious factions. The story of the Watchers is the story of a celestial civil war, a mutiny in the heavenly ranks, with humanity as the collateral damage. Enoch describes how the cries of oppressed humanity reached the heavens, and the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looked down and saw the bloodshed and lawlessness caused by the Watchers. They then went before the throne of the Most High, reporting the rebellion and petitioning for judgment. This is the divine council in session. It is a direct parallel to the scene in Psalm 82. The loyal council members are reporting the corruption of the disloyal ones, and God responds. He commissions the archangels to act. Raphael is to bind the rebel leader Azazel and cast him into darkness. Gabriel is to incite the giant Nephilim to kill one another in battle. And Michael is given the task of binding the other Watchers and imprisoning them in the depths of the earth until the final judgment. Reading Enoch alongside Genesis, Psalms, and Deuteronomy creates a stunningly coherent, if terrifying, picture. The plural Elohim in Genesis One refers to the heavenly assembly. The sons of God from the divine council described in Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32 are the very same beings who are given narrative form as the watchers in the Book of Enoch. The brief cryptic story in Genesis 6 is the tip of a massive iceberg of tradition about a celestial rebellion that had catastrophic consequences for humanity. This was the foundational myth, the grand narrative, that informed the worldview of the ancient world. It explains why the nations were given over to lesser Elohim, many of whom became corrupt. Why evil is so prevalent, and why Yahweh's project with Israel was a direct intervention to reclaim a world that had been contaminated by his own rebellious divine sons. The reason books like Enoch were eventually excluded from the canon becomes clear. This worldview is complex, messy, and frankly, frightening. It presents a universe where God is not in absolute, meticulous control of every event. It describes a cosmos populated by other powerful, willful spiritual beings, some of whom are hostile to humanity. This narrative was gradually sanitized, simplified, and flattened into the more straightforward story of a single God and a fallen humanity. The other gods were demoted to non-existent idols, the celestial conflicts were allegorized, and the plural nature of Elohim was explained away as a grammatical quirk. The raw, epic, and dangerous cosmology of the ancients was replaced by a safer, more systematic theology. But the truth of that older world never vanished. It remains encoded in the text for anyone willing to see. It is the secret that changes everything. We have journeyed from a single plural word in the first sentence of the Bible to the celestial battlefields of the Book of Enoch. We have pulled on a single grammatical thread and watched as the entire tapestry of a lost cosmology has unraveled before us. It is time to step back and assemble the pieces, to gaze upon the new paradigm that emerges from this forbidden knowledge. Let us synthesize what we have discovered. The foundation is this: the word Elohim, the first name used for the Creator in the Bible, is a plural noun. This is not a debate. It is a grammatical fact. For centuries, this fact was obscured by theological explanations, the royal we, or hints of the Trinity, that do not align with the historical and linguistic context of the ancient text. The Bible's own internal evidence supports this plurality. In Genesis, we hear a divine council deliberating. Let Tutat make man in Don-Tor image. We hear their assessment after the fall. The man has become like one of Tuntus. We hear their decision to intervene at Babel. Let Tutat go down. This is not the language of a solitary being. Beyond Genesis, the evidence becomes explicit. Psalm 82 paints a vivid picture of a celestial courtroom where the supreme Elohim Yahweh stands in judgment over a council of lesser Elohim, or gods, condemning them for their corrupt rule over the nations. The Book of Job depicts the sons of God, the Bnei Elohim, presenting themselves before the Lord for a heavenly briefing. And the ultimate key, unlocked by the Dead Sea Scrolls, is found in Deuteronomy 32. It reveals a cosmic map where the Most High God assigned these sons of God to oversee the different nations of the world, while reserving one nation, Israel, for his own direct rule under the name Yahweh. Finally, the suppressed Book of Enoch provides the missing narrative, the rich backstory to this cosmic drama. It identifies a rebellious faction of these sons of God, the Watchers, whose sins of lust and forbidden teachings contaminated the earth, produced monstrous offspring called the Nephilim, and ultimately necessitated the Great Flood. This was not a fringe belief. It was a central tenet of the worldview held by Jews and early Christians for centuries. So what does this all mean? What is the new paradigm? It means that the foundational story of the Bible is not one of simple monotheism, the belief that only one God exists. It is the story of monolatry, the acknowledgement of many divine beings, but the fierce covenantal loyalty to only one Yahweh. The great struggle of the Old Testament is not a battle between the true God and non-existent idols. It is a cosmic war. It is the story of Yahweh proving his supremacy over real rival spiritual powers, the corrupt and rebellious Elohim who governed the other nations. This changes how we read everything. The command, "You shall have no other gods before me," is not a denial of their existence. It is a demand for exclusive loyalty in a crowded spiritual field. The miracles and wonders performed by Yahweh are not just displays of power, they are battlefield victories, demonstrations of his superiority over the gods of Egypt, the gods of Canaan, the gods of Babylon. The Bible is transformed from a simple morality tale into a sprawling, epic saga of cosmic conflict, celestial politics, and divine warfare, with humanity trapped, and yet central, in the middle of it all. Does this destroy faith? For some, perhaps; for others, it deepens it into something far more mysterious, awesome, and profound. It suggests that the universe is infinitely more complex and populated than we imagined. It means that the spiritual realm is not an empty space inhabited only by God and his angels, but a vibrant, structured, and sometimes contentious dimension. It recasts humanity's purpose, to be made in their image. The image of the council suggests that we were created for a far grander role in the cosmos than we have been led to believe, perhaps to one day participate in that very council, to be the loyal and just rulers that the original sons of God failed to be. Genesis's greatest secret is this: the story you were told was a simplification, a flattening of a far more intricate and spectacular reality. The ancient writers of the scriptures did not see a lone God in an empty heaven. They saw a divine king on his throne, surrounded by his celestial court, his heavenly family, his council of divine sons. They saw a cosmos embroiled in a great drama, a story of loyalty and rebellion, of creation, corruption, of judgment and restoration. The first verse of the Bible is not a simple statement of fact. It is an invitation. It is an invitation to look past the translation, beyond the tradition, and to ask the most fundamental question, the question that unlocks it all, when the Bible says, "God, who are we dontrally talking about?" The answer is not a being, but a bureaucracy; not a person, but a pantheon; not a simple truth, but an epic mystery that we have only just begun to explore.